Across Canada, millions of caregivers quietly keep our healthcare system running. Right now, 1 in 4 Canadians is a caregiver supporting aging parents, partners, or other loved ones, often without pay, on top of their existing job and family life. It's meaningful work, but it comes at a cost. Caregivers are experiencing stress, anxiety, exhaustion, and financial strain, all as a direct result of their caregiving. And meanwhile, most Canadians, around 90% of adults over 45, want to age at home. But the system isn't built to meet that demand. In a 2024 report from the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, senior caregivers said improved access to home care was the most important support. Yet over half reported struggling to hire providers, find information, or access affordable local services. That's why innovators are reimagining home care, making it more responsive, more connected, and more centered on both patients and caregivers. Welcome to Where Next Happens. I'm Dr. Claudia Krywiak, President and CEO of the Ontario Centre of Innovation. Chenny Xia is the CEO and co-founder of Gotcare, a technology-enabled home care platform that connects people needing support with qualified personal support workers. A serial entrepreneur and passionate advocate for women in tech, she has led multiple ventures at the intersection of health, community care, and innovation. Chenny has been recognized by SheEO, received National Startup Funding Awards, and was named one of Canada's next 36 leaders. At Gotcare, she is reshaping how home care is delivered, putting patients and care workers at the center of the system. Chenny, it's great to have you with us. Let's start at the beginning. We love a good origin story. So what inspired you to start Gotcare?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Claudia. We're really proud to be a OCI funded venture. So really grateful to be here today with you. I co-founded Gotcare with my co-founder, Carol McDonald, who's an occupational therapist by background. And her and I, we always felt that there was a better way to approach home care. And that one that truly came from a person-centered approach, where we provided the person who was receiving care a lot more ability to sort of have a say in terms of who's coming in the home, when they're coming in the home, what types of services they might need, what types of expenses associated with their home care they might want to submit as well. Really just sort of empowering folks to have a bit more say and be in a bit more of in a driver's seat when it came to their home care experience. So yeah, we built exactly that.
And your experience as an entrepreneur and also as a caregiver, did that shape the vision for the company?
Absolutely. I would say that as a first generation newcomer myself, immigrant myself, I think that a lot of our home care system is staffed by newcomers and new immigrants. So, and particularly women, largely 94% women or something like that. So it's definitely has a personal piece of my heart as well.
So from your perspective, what are the biggest gaps in home care today? And why is this such a big problem for both caregivers and families in Ontario?
I mean, I think it's fundamentally an issue of supply and demand, right? So on the demand side, with the aging population, rise in mental health needs, and rise in chronic conditions, generally speaking, there's just more and more need for services. Yet on the supply side, we are facing, pretty strict budget limitations, right? For example, generally speaking in Canada, provinces don't like to spend more than 40% of their budget on healthcare. And here in Ontario, we're at like 42, 43% right now. So we're all asked to effectively serve more people with the same amount of resources or less. And then on top of that, you add inflationary pressures and labor challenges. So yeah, servicing an increased demand right now is definitely a huge challenge for all provinces across the board right now.
So for listeners who haven't heard of Gotcare before, can you kind of walk us through how does Gotcare work? What is the technology, and how do you work with both caregivers and with the people that are seeking their services?
For sure. So really briefly, we essentially our customers are those who fund care. So we work with various different departments. We also work with hospitals, and then on the sort of private side, we work with insurers, as well as places like workers' compensation boards and things like that too. Really, what we do is we sort of take. Apologize, is a little technical, but we sort of take the assessment in terms of what the patient or claimant has been assessed to be approved for from a total services or budgetary standpoint. And we essentially create what we call a digital care wallet. Once that digital care wallet is created, we provide the person who's receiving care access to that wallet, and they can effectively use that to schedule their own services, to upload expenses, to essentially treat it like a health spending account, right? So to speak. And so that really just provides the person receiving care a lot more, as I mentioned, control and immediate access to their benefit. And then essentially, we also provide the ability to support claimants or patients in connecting to the right service provider. So we have a matching algorithm and a matching process where we have a care manager who can match that patient or claimant to appropriate service provider in their region. We can help set up their care plan and things like that too. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're supporting that patient or claimant in effectively self-managing or sort of self-determining what is best for them. And we just reconcile what the budgets look like at the end of every month. And we send that reporting and that to the care funders.
That's really powerful because that's something that many people who go through our healthcare system don't necessarily feel that sense of empowerment in terms of being able to take control of their care and how and when they receive that care. So can you give us a sense of how many service providers, caregivers, and how many kind of patients, claimants do you currently have on the platform? And are you in the market?
Yeah, so across the country, we have about 30,000 service providers who've been registered and screened on our network. And I think to date now, we've served over, almost 10,000 families.
Oh, wow. So you really are in scale up mode. Can you talk about how you were able to get people onto your platform and deploy across Canada, not just in Ontario?
For sure. On the service provider side, we're really proud to provide the majority of our care workers with an enhanced wage. And there's a few reasons why we can do that. One is that, there's just a lot less, let's call it operational overhead in terms of how our platform sort of manages and supports care, because largely claimants or patients are self-scheduling their services and things like that. Those are costs that we don't have to bear on our side. So we can sort of redirect some of those savings operationally to paying service providers a little bit more. And I would say that, particularly in home care, where often service providers are just making a few bucks above minimum wage, that little bit of extra pay does go a long way and is definitely a very strong way for us to attract appropriate candidates. And then also on the patient side, in terms of how we've been growing our business, our go-to-market strategy has actually been to start with the rural communities. So when we first started, we went to a lot of the care funders that we knew and we said, hey, we know in rural communities, it's really tough right now, right? Like it's tough everywhere, but it's especially tough in rural communities. And essentially for a care funder, the just the sheer amount of money that they're spending per sort of claim or per patient in those rural communities are on average a lot higher than urban communities. So I think that in those communities, there was a lot more openness to trying something new. I think that any sort of technology enabled care, and rightfully so, many can be skeptical about that. So it's sort of like a demonstrate your value in a desperate situation where there isn't another option. Because in many rural communities, it was either Gotcare or no care. Like that was the comparison. And that was how we sort of were able to get some buy-in to at least see what that experience would look like. And then through that process, build trust with our customers who are, again, these funders of care, and expand to suburban and urban communities. But yeah, it was to start, it was all rural.
Very interesting. And what about the funders of the care? Because you're dealing with Ontario's and the Canadian healthcare system. So I would hazard to guess these are procurements. And what is it like for a startup to undertake the procurement process in our healthcare system?
I would say on the private side, so, insurer versus the public side, like the public purse, it's a very different process. On the insurer side, it's really about working through the vendor manager protocol. And so sometimes that's a procured experience. Sometimes it's just about qualifying for that vendor list. And it just looks a little bit different for different types of claims. Nonetheless, it's one style of procurement versus the other. Whereas definitely on the public procurement side, it's definitely a little bit more lengthy and challenging. Let's say that for sure. But I think that the way we've always approached our business is we actually started serving the private sector. So we started in insurance, and we operated in an insurance only context for about 6 years. And then only after that, and really only in the last year and a half, effectively, have we really started looking at how can we service the public sector. And fundamentally, it's because I think just to even be able to survive these procurement cycles, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of cash. So unless you have a steady business to kind of keep the lights on and to keep growth going, it's very challenging for a small business to participate in the public context.
So it's perseverance, but it's also cash flow as well. That's tough for a lot of startups, the latter especially in this space. Any words of advice?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I like to say that any entrepreneur who chooses healthcare in Canada is a bit of a masochist. The unfortunate reality, Claudia, is that many of our startups end up going to the US, right? For both funding and customers. That's the unfortunate reality. I think the reason why Gotcare has been able to stay in Canada is largely, I'm really lucky in that my co-founders both had deep insurance experience prior to us starting the company. So we were sort of, able to hit the ground running, so to speak, when we opened the doors, because we already had that sort of understanding of the insurer market. If we didn't, I'm sure we would have followed the footsteps of others that end up migrating to the US. So yeah, it's definitely challenging. I think that this is where being able to really serve a very high context niche need with our care funders has served us really well. But it's not a walk in the park for sure in Canada.
Is there anything like that could help? Types of supports at that stage for startups to help them either navigate that process and or to help ensure that they kind of stay and grow here rather than leaving?
I mean, I think that OCI is a great example of an organization that supports startups in this context. We wouldn't have been able to expand across the country in the way that we did if it weren't for your organization support. So that's you yourself is a great example of that. And I think we're lucky in the Canadian ecosystem in that we have a few other organizations who fall into this category, right? So whether it's Obio or AgeWell or Can Health or others, we do have a few organizations that are set up to help startups, especially in an early stage context. I think though, where we really lose startups is sort of in that mid stage, right? So once they sort of get to that seed, post seed, series A stage, that's where sort of the optionality for support starts to dwindle a little bit. I think we have a lot in the beginning, but not a lot in the middle.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that's a definitely an opportunity for there to be a bit more programming and support in that way.
The support that you received through OCI was through Ontario's Life Sciences Innovation Fund, or LSIF, and that was a pre-seed seed stage investment where other investors participated as well. Can you talk a little bit about fundraising and kind of specifically in this space and what investors are looking for and what made you attractive to investors?
I mean, I will say raising money now is very different than when we raised our last round with yours truly, which was, gosh, about 2.5 years ago or so. And I think that the funding landscape is one that is constantly dynamic. So I always encourage founders to talk to founders who are currently raising to get the best understanding of what is happening right now. But what I will say in terms of advice that I received and that has worked well with me throughout my throughout the different fundraising rounds that we've had is that ultimately just a reminder that the timeline from the point you first meet an investor to the time that they write a check is typically like minimum a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, sometimes 3 years. It's very rare, very, very rare, especially at the sort of seed and beyond Series A and on round. In Canada, at least, it's very rare to find an investor where that check would be written and it's your first time meeting them and you're like 4 months in, right? So definitely building those relationships while you're not actively raising is the best strategy to really build that trust, help them build that understanding of your company over time, as opposed to sort of waiting for you to actually announce the round to start trying to build those relationships. I think that's a common mistake that perhaps some earlier founders make. Work those relationships and make those relationships easier. And the other thing I would say as well is I think that it's really important to stay really grounded and really rooted in what is it that you're doing, why it matters, and why your team is the right team to approach this during the process. Because you're going to get no's, you're going to get maybes. It's a lot of people poking and prodding your business. And I think that to really ensure that you achieve the best outcome, it's sort of, standing tall like an oak tree and whatever practices you need personally to manage that and maintain that is also really important.
Mm. And so, yes, the landscape for investment has changed, and I really like your description. It is fluid, and those relationships need to be built right from the outset. But speaking of challenges, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges you faced in either starting up Gotcare or scaling Gotcare?
I think the biggest challenge is that we're still learning right now is just the navigation of procurement in healthcare specifically, right? Like I'm talking like, what are you going to do when you get like 250-page, 300-page contracts? That's a whole business in and of itself, And it's taken us a long time to really learn, and we're still learning. It's like a continuous journey of learning how to navigate procurement. And it's challenging because it's like a learn by doing process. There's no like manual or handbook out there. Because it's also dynamic and changing, right? Like what is being procured is changing. So definitely a learning by doing process. And definitely in terms of accessing capital, there's only so many investors in a Canadian context that you really have to really look at what are your American options and even European options as well.
Did you face any challenges that were specific to being a woman entrepreneur, whether it was in fundraising or in other areas?
It's really interesting whenever someone asks me this question, because whenever I'm in a situation where I feel like I'm not being respected or the communication is just not flowing, I kind of I don't force it. I just leave the room. I'm like, I'm good. I don't need to be here. So honestly, there are definitely situations where you may be disadvantaged as a female entrepreneur, but I just don't participate. There's so many others that you can work with where that is not an issue at all. That yeah, I just don't think it's even worth your oxygen.
That's a great response. Flipping it to make it on your own terms. I'm good. I don't need to participate. Speaking of impact, what difference have you seen Gotcare kind of make so far for whether it's families or caregivers or patients or for the system overall?
Yeah. Ultimately, our core focus is to really make it easier for families to be able to access care, and is to really shorten the time that it will take them to access care. Because when you need care, nobody will act faster than yours truly, right? So, so yeah, that definitely speed to care and time to care is definitely the key impact there, as well as the ability for people to feel like that they have the ability to actually personalize that care. So they're able to pick and choose what matters most to them, what type of goals are most important to them, what types of services are most meaningful for them, even breaking it down in terms of, what would I prefer to how do I prefer to be supported by a service provider versus by a loved one, and being able to yourself make that choice, I think really humanizes the experience of home care. Because let's be honest, a lot of people who, when it comes to receiving home care, there can be a little bit of resistance because it's sort of almost, you feel like you're losing a sense of independence, right? But really, I think that if we change how we approach home care, we can help our patients and claimants see it as a way of extending their independence as opposed to a loss of independence. But it's really that approach that really matters. And yeah, on the service provider side, being on our platform and working through that just means that you're able to have a more direct and more meaningful relationship with the person you're caring for. Our service providers, they typically live very close to the patients that they serve. They can speak the same language. There's some shared cultural understanding. So that's also really meaningful for them. And then for our system partners and collaborators, I think ultimately, the best, let me put this, the best compliment I ever got was when we were meeting with someone at the systems level and they were saying, "Oh, I'm so glad to be in this meeting today with you. This is like my favorite meeting of the day." And I'm really proud about that, because I think ultimately, what I hope that we represent is just an alternative way forward, hope for a different possible future. And yeah, and just really bringing out the ability for our partners to think creatively, to really work in a co-creative context, co-design context, I think has been really powerful for our partners as well. But yeah, ultimately, it's really just about how do people feel when they're receiving those services, and also how do our partners feel when they're collaborating with us to design the workflow for those services as well.
You talk about co-development and co-design, whether you're working with the insurers, the private funders, or the public funders. Is this something that you're used to? Are you kind of setting new ground in terms of how vendors and the organizations that work with those vendors work together on procurements?
Yeah, I think that co-design is definitely becoming more and more common. It's really the degree of co-design that we take, right? And really, for us, it means having our patients and service providers be a part of that design process, making it feel like that this is designed by them for them is always really important to us. The nice thing about taking that type of approach is that it makes adoption a lot easier on the other side. So ultimately, that we definitely see a lot of openness to this approach, especially in health. I think there isn't a lot of friction on it. It's just a matter of being able to identify the right users to be able to participate, to figure out what the ethics of that looks like, the privacy of that looks like, some governance around that. But yeah, generally speaking, we don't get a lot of pushback on it at all.
And in terms of the healthcare sector overall and innovation in the healthcare sector and disruption, both positive and in the negative sense as well, one of the areas which is being discussed a lot is the potential for AI to actually have a very big impact in the healthcare sector. So does that play into Gotcare's technology? And in general, how do you see the role of AI in our healthcare system going forward?
Yeah, AI is definitely something that we incorporate into our business when appropriate, and are actively continually monitoring and exploring. I think that at this current juncture, at this current moment in time, for us, because we largely work with older adults and people living with disabilities, having AI tools and sort of, chatbots, et cetera, that they engage with themselves is not exactly appropriate for our use case. But what we do often use AI for is for operational optimization and automation. So, for example, AI is really great when we're looking to match a patient with a service provider. AI is really great when we look at all of the various different data inputs coming in, whether it's through, some home monitoring devices that we've installed, or through service provider provided outputs or patient outputs. All of that can be filtered through an AI model as well to help our team monitor that data. So all of that sort of process and operational optimization in an AI context, I think that's really smart, makes sense, helps you do things faster and in a more efficient manner. But at this point, in terms of actually having patient or even service provider tools, I think we want to wait a little bit longer before we deploy anything in that context. But absolutely, and then of course within our teams as well. I think AI agents in sort of as a team member to augment and to improve employee output and throughput is also a great opportunity as well. Whether it's from a customer success standpoint or an engineering standpoint, there's a lot of great ways that AI can be adopted in that way within the team. But yeah, definitely more limited from a direct to patient standpoint right now, though.
It's interesting the way you describe it, though, because it really is essentially a very kind of human-centric approach that you're describing, that you're leveraging these tools where appropriate. But at the end of the day, you're looking at the needs of your patients and of the people that are using the platform. And it is a very kind of personal, human-centric approach that Gotcare is taking. What's next for Gotcare? You're expanding across Canada. What is the vision over the next 3 years? Are you looking expanding internationally? And just in terms of where you see the platform going from here?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's sort of two fronts where we're really pushing the agenda. One is actually in with our service provider network. So we've been sort of quietly upskilling and tooling our service providers to a role that we call health ambassadors. And this is a really, really exciting development for us because it's also sort of core to sort of our mission as a company as well, kind of going back to the beginning of this recording. We have a training program here at Gotcare where we effectively upskill service providers in our network who are, again, typically PSWs, RPNs, DSWs, CSWs, a lot of unregulated health professionals in home care. We have a program where we upskill them to support older adults and people living with disabilities with things like digital literacy, with things like health monitoring, home installations, with things like learning how to order your groceries on your phone so that in the winter you're reducing your how many times you're leaving your home to prevent slips and falls. So it's a lot of kind of like a little bit like rent a granddaughter.
I love it.
But definitely sort of bridging that digital health literacy gap, for sure, and providing that coaching and sort of mentorship and support in that regard is really, I think, a role that our unregulated workers across Canada and internationally as well can fill as a way of sort of, because if we can make the home a more connected experience and to help our patients and claimants be a little bit more connected digitally as well to services, it means that we can start to really meaningfully look at how we can make home care a little bit more interoperable with primary care, with acute care. Like, I think that just by enabling that within the home environment, in the home setting, and that the home as the hub of that activity has a tremendous amount of potential for our system. So definitely empowering our workers to be able to play that role. For example, one of the other things that we have them, we teach them as well is how to work with and in a multidisciplinary context. So for example, in a rural setting, you might have a patient who's struggling to access, let's call it occupational therapy or physiotherapy sessions because, or that professional and specialist only comes to that community, let's say for one day every 3 weeks. So we can actually enable a virtual visit where you have a health ambassador who's in the home working with a virtual clinician, potentially in an urban setting even. And essentially that health ambassador is the eyes, ears, hands, boots on the ground. They can help with basic assessments, basic environmental scans. They can also help with coaching and mentoring and supporting patients in the home in that way too. So definitely a lot of potential in terms of how we see we can sort of have unregulated workers and clinicians working together in a more meaningful team-based context. And definitely a lot more as well on the patient empowerment side in terms of how they can be a bit more connected as well. And yeah, absolutely. To your point, beyond Canada, international, sort of that international expansion of our programming is on the radar too.
That's awesome. That really is amazing because you're not simply providing a technology platform that connects caregivers with patients. What you're doing is actually building capacity and expanding capacity, not only in caregivers and in patients, but in the healthcare system overall. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's an amazing story and you're having tremendous impact. And it is our pleasure to be able to support and privileged to be able to support you along that journey. Thank you so much, Chenny, for sitting down with us today to talk.
Thanks, Claudia. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of Where Next Happens. To learn more about Chenny's work and Gotcare, visit gotcare.ca. Thank you for joining us this season as we spoke to the entrepreneurs and the innovators that were having an impact in Ontario, across Canada, and globally. Where Next Happens is produced by the Ontario Centre of Innovation. This episode was produced by Jasmine Ratch, edited by Gaten Harris. Amanda Cupido is the executive producer, and I'm your host, Dr. Claudia Krywiak. Ready to take your idea to the next level? The Ontario Centre of Innovation helps innovators access the funding, mentorship, and resources they need to drive the future forward. Visit oc-innovation.ca/podcast to learn more.